So today we are making 20 pizzas. And we're following the formula that a recently promoted baker at Proof came up with on their baker's test. This is a thing that we introduced earlier in the year where people can advance through their production roles and transition from apprentice to baker. As a part of the process of becoming a baker at Proof, a higher level apprentice makes a product. And one of our newly promoted bakers, Ian, he worked on Roman pizza. And I have to say, I've heard some feedback that the dough comes together hard. The amount of bassonage in his formula is quite high, and as a result, some members of the team struggle to put this dough together. It's a very high hydration dough. I don't know if the problem is just the expectation of the dough, like it's expected that a dough is easier to make than this, or the problem is just, or the problem is the actual procedure itself. Maybe there's, no problem at all. But I'm going to run this just as our team is running it in Mesa, and try to troubleshoot this a little bit, see what we can come up with. So, essentially I'm now looking at a formula that somebody who was never trained in baking before working at Proof came up with about a year and a half into their journey. And as far as I can tell, this was just something that he put together through trial and error, and probably has about a month or two of development behind it. Some of our doughs, like our sourdough croissant dough, literally have years of development, of fine-tuning and tweaking. And so now I'm kind of taking a second look at this and saying, no, it's not a static thing that will just live forever on the menu as it is. Maybe it's something that we need to tweak a little bit. But for starters, I need to gain an understanding of it myself. We're really short on buckets. It's kind of a problem because I don't have the ability to transfer between containers. Let's see, 61.95. So I got my water, my starting water. There's actually a lot more water that's going into this dough, but it goes in stages. Which actually consequently is something that we're looking into with this whole formula is, could we take some of the water that's being introduced later and just simplify the process by introducing it now? And what's interesting is now that I'm looking at the formula, I can also see weaknesses in the formula itself. For instance, it only has the 00 flour. And that's a more refined white flour, which is the proper choice for pizza on the whole, but it can be merged. If you supplement with something more flavorful, you name it, like the white Sonora that we have, or the Rouge Bordeaux that we have. It doesn't have to be a whole lot of it. You can bring in the flavor of those grains to enhance the flavor of the the actual crust, which is a big part of this pizza. So, I mean, for me, I'm a little bit reluctant to even start with just double O. I think I'm gonna probably skip that step and go straight into supplementing it with something. Maybe I'll even throw in just a little bit of rye, sifted rye. Not a whole lot. I'm talking about a few percentage points of the flour. Either way, we'll start a bin for the double O here. One thing that I haven't really thought out with this facility all that well yet is where do all the bins end up living as we get more and more bins of flour. So apparently we're going to get an Instacart delivery of basil in the next hour.
Yeah, that's what we just heard. That helps.
Hilarious. I'm having to do some improvising today because we're just discovering as we go some of the side effects of the different transfers that we do between the facilities. For instance, one of the roles of this location is to do the prep work for Mesa, so we're often sending out containers of 22 quart containers of prepped, say, frangipan or whatever else that we're doing some to prepare in advance here. But currently there's no real return route for those items. There's no reason naturally for Mesa to send back the 22 quart containers. So we, like on a day like today, don't have the 22 quart containers that I usually measure flour into or usually measure water. They're usually abundant, and we have just this one. So typically I will always have a dry bucket and a wet bucket, and preferably multiple of each, because then you can handle, your workflows. Today I'm settling for the bowl, and this is my one wet bucket, so actually, I don't know, I have to do a lot of strange things as a result. This is the double O flour. And here's where I'm gonna immediately modify the recipe. I did basically all but 5.5% ballpark in the base double O. And now I'm gonna make up the difference, just 642 grams in a freshly milled rye. What's kind of fun is having the mill here, you know what you milled that you don't really have a use case for. Start kind of being creative along those lines. So I just need a little bit of rye flour. This is a sifted rye, so I'm hoping that the fact that it's sifted will actually play to my favor in the pizza dough, where it's a little bit lighter. It's not going to add too much density, but I'm not adding a whole lot of it for that reason. I'm not trying to add density to the dough, just trying to add a little bit of flavor. You'll be able to see atop of the white flour the difference in color. I guess you can equate color with flavor in flour. The less color a flour has, the less overall flavor it usually has as well. It's more starchy. Stone milled flours, as a general rule, are more flavorful. Also, freshly milled flours, as a general rule, are more flavorful. So by adding a small percentage of house milled flour to the formula, regardless of what I do with the rest of the dough, I will certainly make a better pizza dough. Kind of fun to move to this mixer again. I think this is my first personal mix on this mixer since it was in the garage. I've looked at it in here and I've seen other people use it, but Some of the stuff I've been doing recently is far from the menu still, and it's in the smallest of mixers. I kind of enjoy this hand crank, although this mixer's crank kind of slips, so we used to have it bungeed behind, and we'll see if that happens today and whether I need to introduce a bungee. Seems like a garage move. We're going to do an auto lease with this dough, so I'm just getting it going, and once the ingredients come together, I'll kill the mixer. The water in the base dough is 6,100 grams, and then there's 3,000 grams of bassinage water. So that's what people on the team have meant when they say half of the water is going in later, and it's one of the points of contention is whether this is necessary. The first time around I'm going to do it. I want to see what it's like, and then the next time I do this I'm going to just simply modify this step, add more of this in at first, hopefully, and put less in at the tail end. But that's partially based on how this dough comes together. My understanding in Ian's methodology is that he wanted to build a strong enough base dough to have an auto lease. If you make this too wet at the beginning, then the auto lease maybe in his mind wasn't as valuable. I question whether that's true or not. This is quite stiff. I could develop this dough with an auto lease from a more wet position. I can say that quite confidently. So some of that water from the bassinage could easily come in here. I would even say it's like unfavorably stiff in the sense that it's taking it a moment to grab some of the dough and incorporate it. So I'm actually having to run this mixer longer in this beginning stage than I would personally prefer. But I can't really kill it and start the auto lease process until all the dough is cohesive. So it's currently made more challenging by how stiff the formula is. Could probably shave 2 active minutes off, because I currently can't do much other than stare at this bowl. It's going to come together in a matter of a minute or two. I can scale my salt out, but I'm not going to need it for 30 minutes. All right, so I'm getting ahead of myself. This is my salt and this is my water. I need to measure out Harriet too, which I learned was fed this morning. She's already actually smelling good. One thing about Harriet is quite strong as a sourdough starter. Comes to life very quickly. We're reaching that 5-hour mark. Usually I don't like using Harriet this early, but for pizza it actually might be favorable. There's this theory that if you use your sourdough starter a little earlier in the process, you're going to get a more mild dough. The lactobacillus being less active at this stage in fermentation, so you're kind of cutting off its effects. I will go ahead and kill this mixer now. The dough is very strong, and my guess is this is what the intention was. I have already introduced the sticky element with the rye. I can feel it. It's only 5%, and it doesn't actually stick to my hands, but it's enough that could potentially make dough handling just slightly more inconvenient. I've got the salt and the extra water, and now if we just scale out the starter that I need, I'll at least be in a good prepared state. Do you guys know the trick of if you get your Cambro wet before you put starter in it, and if you're transferring that starter out, just like kind of slides out.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, yeah. Generally, I use water as a lubricant in the bakery a lot. You know, the table, you can either go flour or water, but water's cleaner. So you guys, I added some rye to the pizza dough.
Oh, really? That's cool.
It's like 5%.
How's that gonna tweak it?
It's gonna add flavor. It's not gonna change the dough very much, but it should add a nice, like little bit of something to the dough. So it's not just like a bland, tasteless base.
Yeah.
So now that the dough is in the mixer in the passive autolyse stage, I'm gonna let it go for about 20 to 30 minutes. In that time, it will build strength in a passive way. I think this is an area where our production team maybe has been skipping, and this could be causing trouble in building the dough later on. So we've had instances where our production team could not put together this dough in a strong way. It's a very high hydration dough. I actually think we're doing ourselves a disservice starting with such a stiff autolyse, making it more more water to put in later, and you have to go pretty slow. That being said, regardless of how much water we're putting in at the beginning, we need to build a nice foundation of dough strength to build a high hydration dough at the very end. So we need 30 minutes. So on the topic of this pizza that we're making, all of Ian's efforts in his baker's progression were in the dough. He was trying to build a nice, spongy focaccia that was open and airy. Literally, my spec requirements was something that was open and airy and easy to eat, something that could accept toppings, pretty nicely. However, we never actually got to topping development. And as a result, the moment that we opened up this facility, right around the same time, I pulled topping prep here. And so Luis has been doing a ton of the topping prep along with Brandon and Dave since day one in this facility. Where we started was not... Go ahead, Luis, don't worry. Where we started was literally buying pesto. And I'm almost ashamed to say that, because we pride ourselves on doing things in the most scratch way, in our dough development. It doesn't get any more, fundamental than the way that we build our dough. So buying ready-made pesto is not on brand for us at all. Because as Luis is saying, you can differentiate on roasting the garlic. You can differentiate on toasting the walnuts. So as you're building the pesto, you can do specific things to bring more flavor. And of course, it's freshly prepared. There's no preservatives. We can tailor it to the pizza that we're making with it and make it something unique and special, just like our doughs. So it's really nice to work on the toppings. We're just in the early stages. But this pesto pie, it's what, pesto and artichoke? What else are you putting on the final
Pesto,
pie?
marinated artichokes, portobello mushrooms, jalapenos, and red onions.
And it's just fire. People love it. Adding the starter. And add the salt. So between the two, taking it out of autolyse mode. And then once the dough comes back together, I will add the rest of the water in increments. As I look forward to our next trial in a week, where I'll cut this amount of water that I'm adding later on in the process in half. Okay, so the dough is currently not together. The wetter starter has formed its own mini dough in the middle of a stiffer outer ring of dough. We need this all to kind of come together before I add any more to it. I also don't want the temperature to climb too rapidly, so I'm leaving it on slow. So on second speed, I brought this dough quickly together. I mean, literally less than a minute in second speed. This planetary is so much stronger than our 80 quart planetary in Mesa. It's nice to work on it again. It's a shame to just see it in my garage doing nothing for 2 years. So the initial dough would have easily accepted this water with little effort. Okay, I'm gonna kick it up to 2 for just a moment. Hopefully this dough comes together within a minute and I can add more water. What I don't like about the formula so far is that it's unnecessarily active for the baker. I can't really step away from this. I have to babysit it. I have to tease the water in. And so any amount of this that I don't have to tease in this way, that I can just pour in at the beginning and count on being developed, is worthwhile. Because I could be doing something else right now. I could be running the mill. I could be starting another mix. I'm even thinking about the interview that I have to run in a few minutes and thinking, gosh, I gotta get this water in this dough. So it's really no wonder that our team doesn't like mixing this dough. It's perhaps unnecessarily challenging. I added like another half of the water that I need to add. Obviously a little too much. It's coming over the edges. Might have gotten a little ambitious there. I'm still a man stuck here with my can of water. The last bit of water I put in the dough is starting to be accepted, but not well enough that I can put more water in. And I've just been chatting with Dave this whole time. Dave recently put together ciabatta, which is also a wet dough. Generally, Dave's like our baguette and ciabatta, guru. So you could say he knows a wet dough. He agrees that it's unnecessary for so much water to be left behind at the end. And when he has to mix this dough in Mesa, he ends up getting trapped here for a good 10 minutes as he drizzles on second speed. We're debating whether introducing this water in this way would lead to a more open crumb. So we want to see the crumb structure of the pizza that we're making, see how open it is. Then next time we do this, when we change this variable, we'll see how it changes over time. Will we produce a less open pizza crust this way? There's currently a lot of rules governing what makes the final product what it is. But those rules haven't been tested yet. Which of the rules actually need to be there and which of the rules are just, perhaps a newer baker taking kind of an extreme cautious route in building their dough. Too much. Still have more to go. So we've hit the point of the process now that I can take my pizza dough and start transferring it to its final home, which is going to be this tray. I don't have any brushes at this facility yet. Just remember, this is the early days of this facility, so this is not the most optimal way of spreading oil on a tray, but it is what it is. So I have to oil all these trays. But essentially, the baking of the pizza shell is kind of like, that's too much. It's kind of like frying it in oil. Get a really nice bottom color, a little bit of a crisp. Actually, maybe that's the right amount of oil. It should be pretty liberally applied. So I'm going to try to divide these into consistent roughly 1,000 or 1 kilo chunks, squares actually, and then they will eventually fill the tray. So the goal is for the dough to fill the tray fully. They'll go cold overnight. They'll be stretched and proofed, and then it will be time to bake the shells. All right, you know you're working with a wet dough when it basically just pours out. But it's surprisingly cohesive for being a wet dough. It's very satisfying, actually. So a little trick is with something this wet, if you just barely dust it with flour on top, it's a lot easier to manage. What does 1,000 grams or 1 kilo look like? First one's a guess. Shot over, so. It's also nice when it's already kind of in a rectangle. So now that my dough is on the tray in a rectangle, I can just allow it to relax and relax and relax and relax. And when it's done relaxing, then it goes in the fridge. We can also correct course. In the morning, before we throw this dough in the proofer, we'll actually finish stretching it when it's in its cold setting. Right now, it doesn't really want to stretch much because it's been folded a million times. So it's going to naturally relax, but we want it to fully spread out. So that's one of the challenges right now. So at this point, I'm intentionally evening it out on the tray. So once this dough now spreads out and proofs fully, for which we're almost a full day away, all of our active work is pretty much done at this point. We just got to move it to the right temperature, maybe do a little bit of stretching. The passive work is just beginning. Once that passive work completes in about a day, we're going to bake the shells. And that's essentially like, I guess you could call it kind of like par baking. You could also say that we're baking the pizza bianca. So we're baking that base pizza, the white pizza that doesn't have anything on it. Kind of going extreme in the sense that we're baking the bottom pretty intensely and we're trying to keep the top relatively light. But that's kind of our technique. It's fully baked by the time we put the toppings on it, but the top is light and can accept more color. And so then when we do put the toppings on it, we bake it very top heavy in terms of the oven settings to promote the cooking or crisping of the ingredients. I'm debating whether I like the dough on the scale and then onto the tray, and I think so because I get to kind of refine it.
So the first process in our pizzas before we get them and send them out is we pre-bake the shells for 10 minutes. Essentially what we're doing is pan frying the dough on the bottom. The best analogy I could give you is like Pizza Hut pan fried pizza. That's essentially what we want to do, is create a nice little golden crust on the bottom so it's crunchy before we bake it off. The raw dough along with the toppings, it's going to be very inconsistent. So your toppings are going to cook faster than the bread. And essentially you'll have just overcooked toppings and then soggy bread. This is very crucial because we want to bake off the bread before we put the toppings on it, because it's essentially focaccia. All right, I'm gonna close this little guy. We're gonna set our 10-minute timer. We're gonna steam it for 5 seconds. Kill 2 birds with 1 stone. We're already here, so we might as well bake off our English muffins. English muffins are traditionally made on a skillet. So we turned off the top part of the heat to only have heat on the bottom to replicate a skillet as best we can. Little burn marks in it. The pesto does smell a lot better though. Oh, that's coming out pretty. And then we'll top it with everything else right now. We'll just set it to the side while the other stuff, that needs a little more color.
And then it's getting arugula.
Yeah, I'll see if I can get some cheese on my day off and I'll bring it in.
We got our, we have the instant heat